Hey class, welcome back to video number 2. As I was saying, there are, on both sides of the battlefield, you've got the British and the Continental Forces, or the British and the Colonial Forces, and they both have their own unique strengths and weaknesses. Now, I've kind of laid these out here for you, and if you need to pause the video to kind of write down the key ones, but I'm going to kind of explain each one of them to you so you can have a better understanding. I will tell you which ones I think are key, but if you think a different one is key, please feel free to write those down under key strengths and key weaknesses. For the Continental Army, this side of the screen, you'll notice that they'll have several key strengths. First of all, as I was talking about before, their key strength, I think the overall number one key strength that they have is home field advantage. Think about the Cardinals playing at Busch Stadium, or a much better baseball team like the Royals playing Kansas City. When you play at home, you feel this desire to really defend your home, and also to try a lot harder than you did before. And also in a war, you want to try to protect your home, because if that British army gets past you, then they might be going to your village, your town, your city, or even your farm, and may kill your family or burn down your farm. And so home field advantage was actually a huge part of their strength. And it's also going to kind of link up with a key weakness of the British that we're going to talk about here in just a second. Another is, for the most part, the populace of the colonies, several million strong. The populace was very supportive of the American Revolution. About half of the population was hardcore patriot, while 25% really supported the British, and then another 25% were kind of on the fence, like they didn't really know what they wanted to do. They kind of just like went with the wind, which army was in town that they could kind of ally themselves with. In addition, they have unorthodox tactics. That's the guerrilla warfare that we talked about. So if you wanted to kind of talk about another key that you might want to write down is unorthodox tactics. And if you want to, just put a little dash next to that and say guerrilla warfare. And then lastly, George Washington was kind of a genius whenever it came to battlefield tactics. You know, he wasn't as good as like a Napoleon, which we'll talk about later, but George Washington was one of the best things that the Continental Army did by hiring him to kind of be their general. And also, he was a true believer in the cause. On the British side, the strengths are in their navy. They have the largest navy in the world, and the most powerful navy in the world. This large navy gives them an ability to move their army anywhere. As you guys saw earlier in the map, every single colony touches the Atlantic Ocean. So that gives the ability of the British Navy to sail anywhere into any port, drop off 10,000 troops, and just encircle George Washington and his troops, which, by the way, have no navy at all, and really create some devastation in multiple locations if they want to. And if you do any more research into the American Revolution, you'll notice that they do that. They launched several amphibious campaigns throughout the colonies to really screw with George Washington's head. In addition, the British also have a professional army. This 30,000-man army that they send, this is their job. These are not farmers who just happen to be fighting. These are guys who've been trained for years to be soldiers, and they have year or 2 or 5 year long contracts in which they're going to be British soldiers during that 5-year experience. The British Army has fought on every major continent over the last about 50 years. So their officers, especially the high-ups, are very experienced in warfare. And then lastly, probably one of the most, the other big strength of the British Army is that they are supported by the Crown. And as we talked about with mercantilism, the British government is extremely wealthy. And so when they want to go to war, they bring the full force of their military, their navy, and their army to bring that down. And the British Crown, which doesn't have to deal with democracy or government or anything like that, if the king wants to throw more resources at the war, he can. On the opposing side, the Continentals do have some weaknesses, however. For the most part, their key weaknesses are the fact that they are going up against the largest navy in the world with essentially no navy. In addition to that, they have a militia-based army, which means that at any one time, a lot of George Washington's soldiers can just up and leave. That's what it means to be a militia-based army. You are not required to stay on board for an entire year, or 2 years, or 5 years. If you want to come fight for 3 months and then leave to go harvest your crops and then come back later, you can. And so at any given time, George Washington really, and this is a funny thing about the war, George Washington really never knew how many troops he had. So you kind of look at some of the numbers during the war. I mean, he uses a lot of rough estimates. He says, like, I think, 12,000 men, but he only might have 10,000 because a couple thousand left or they deserted or whatever. On the opposing side, the British, their key disadvantage is the fact that they are fighting 3,000 miles away from home. Just think about how much resources it requires to ship 30,000 troops across the Atlantic Ocean, all their gear, all their ammunition, all their food, their horses, their officers, everything, and to constantly supply those men over and over again. I mean, you can get some food from the countryside of the colonists, but you don't want to do that too much, or you're going to alienate the population so much that they won't support you. So the British had to ship a lot of their food in from England, which was a huge burden. And I'll tell you guys a little bit tomorrow about some of the extreme debt that the British Empire went in just because of this war. Besides that, of course, the European fighting style just did not mesh up well against the colonial fighting style. Some key battles for you that happened during the war. Of course, we have the Battle of Lexington Concord, which we talked about already. But what I want you to do is I want you to take a look at your notes real quick. You'll notice that there's a section there in which it asks you to research, just on Wikipedia or something, one of these battles. The Battle of New York, the Battle of Trenton, the Battle of Brandywine Creek, the Battle of Camden, the Battle of Kings Mountain, or Guilford Courthouse. And I just want you guys to write like 2-sentence kind of explanation about where it was, what happened, and then what was the outcome, and kind of try to figure out what is the key fact there. I don't want you to spend too much of time on this, but I want you to do a little bit of research on a different battle. Pause the video, do that, come back to me. All right, welcome back. I think the absolutely most key battle of the American Revolution has got to be the Battle of Saratoga. Now, it wasn't necessarily a massive victory for the Americans, even though as you can see, we did capture destroy one of their key generals, General Burgoyne, and we did capture 6,000 British troops. But the real victory came with France. So, a little backstory for you. Over the course of the last couple years, Ben Franklin has actually been in France negotiating with the French. The French are kind of angry because 20 years before this war, the French had lost the French and Indian War to the British. So the French are looking for any opportunity to get back at the British. The French are kind of looking at the Americans and wondering, can the Americans win? If they can win, we'll help them out and make the British look bad. But if they're not going to win, if it doesn't really look like they have any hope of winning, which is kind of what they're thinking is going to happen, they're not going to really throw a whole lot of resources and money and troops and ships at a conflict that in the end is going to be a failure. So when the Battle of Saratoga actually comes out and Horatio Gates actually wins, Ben Franklin runs to the King of France and says, look, we can beat them. Our guerrilla forces and our continental forces can beat them. What do you think? And with that, the French king says, absolutely, let's go. And he starts sending a whole lot of money to the Continentals to pay like gold, not like paper money, gold, to the Continental Army to start paying their soldiers. They start sending them a lot of new muskets. And also he dispatches the French Navy to start making its way towards the British. Towards England and also towards the colonies so that they can help and actually kind of start leveling the playing field. In the end, what the French really offer is they offer a navy. And as I said before, the British Navy has been unchallenged up to this point on the seas, except for a few pirates here and there, but that's really in the end no big deal. But the French offer a professional navy that's going to be able to challenge the British in open seas combat. So go ahead and make sure that you write that down. In the end, the British are going to slowly lose this war. Over the course of 6 years, their debt is going to keep mounting and mounting and mounting, and they're going to have to raise taxes over and over again on English people in England and in Scotland and in Wales and in Ireland and the other colonies to try to pay for this war. In the end, they're going to spend something ridiculous like 186 million pounds on this war, which if you look at today's dollar amount for that, they spent like over $1 trillion. They spent several $1 trillion on this war, which they just did not have. As this war drags on, the people in England, the people in Great Britain, keep wondering, if this is such a small rebellion, why have we not won yet? What's the holdup? And then lastly, they're getting really. The British are saying, you know what? If they want to fight this hard to get away, then let them go. I mean, we don't really need them that much. And so the war is going to slowly turn against the British forces. There's going to be a final battle. General Cornwallis is going to be defeated at the Battle of Guilford Courthouse, and he's going to retreat to the ocean, to the Atlantic Ocean. And from the Atlantic Ocean, his plan is to be picked up by the British Navy, taken back up to New York, where he can kind of escape George Washington's army from Guilford Courthouse. He goes to a city known as Yorktown, right on the ocean, and the night before he gets there, the British Navy is actually sitting in the harbor waiting for him, and all of a sudden the French Navy shows up. There is a massive battle called the Battle of the Chesapeake, in which numerous ships are sunk or severely damaged. The French end up losing a few ships, but in the end the French have brought enough ships that the British actually have to retreat from the seas. And when Cornwallis wakes up the next morning, all he sees out in the harbor is just dozens of French battleships, ships of the line, essentially the battleships of the time. And then he looks out onto the land where he thinks he can maybe escape, and there's George Washington's armies, along with about 8,000 French army troops, which is another big thing that they offered. And so over the course of the next few days, General Washington and the French bombard from both sides Cornwallis until eventually Cornwallis surrenders to George Washington and says, you know what, this war is over. And with that victory at Yorktown in 1781, the war is over. That is the last official battle of the American Revolution. With the Battle of Yorktown complete, there's going to be a peace treaty signed called the Treaty of Paris, 1783. It's going to be signed between the British, the Americans, and the French. In that treaty, the British must recognize the United States of America as a separate entity, as its own independent country, not bound by the British Empire. Also, they gave the Americans a huge amount of land. They essentially doubled the size of the United States with just the stroke of a pen. You can kind of see the whitish area here is the new United States. If you guys can remember, the proclamation line of 1763, just 20 years earlier, kind of went around the Appalachian Mountains right here. But as you can see, we are now all the way to the Mississippi River. Here's you guys right here. Here's us. And there is the new boundaries of the United States. So that's essentially East St. Louis. So think East St. Louis all the way to the East Coast, except for Florida. That is all now the United States of America. With that victory and with that treaty being signed, the United States has gained independence from the British, and you may now, at this time, without fear of punishment from the teacher or other students, you may now chant USA, USA, USA. You may do that 5 times without feeling like you're going to be punished in any way. Thank you guys so much for your attention today. Of course, as you're done with this video, and if there's any time left, please go ahead and work on your homework packet. I know all of you guys probably have a lot of that to still do. And there were several terms that you learned today that could definitely be done. Thank you again for your attention today and your cooperation. I look forward to seeing you again tomorrow whenever I return to class.